Hi, good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Kalia Brooks Nelson. I'm the director for the Mellon Arts Project in the newly formed Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies at Columbia University. It's my pleasure to introduce tonight's conversation and the Mellon Arts Project. The Mellon Arts Project is designed to highlight the arts and artists as resources for teaching and learning, and for transforming the ways we think of ourselves, our communities, our nation, and the world. The partnerships and arts programming created through this initiative are part of a larger intellectual project housed in the Black Studies Department. The project launched this academic year and will continue over the course of 3 years in collaboration with departments at Columbia, Harlem-based organizations, and cultural institutions nationally and abroad. Tonight's program is especially significant because it brings together the first two programs to be established through the Mellon Arts Project, the Black Arts Dialogues and the Artists in Residence. The Black Arts Dialogues, affectionately referred to as BAD, is hosted and curated by New York Times best-selling author Ayana Mathis. Mathis is the author of 12 Tribes of Hattie and the forthcoming A Violent Woman. She is the first African-American woman to hold a permanent faculty position at the prestigious Iowa Writers' Workshop. BAD is a series of one-on-one conversations about art and Blackness with artists of distinction in various disciplines. The series celebrates artists as global thought leaders and culture makers who shape history, society, and aesthetics. With that, I'll hand it over to Ayana. Enjoy the program.
Hello, hello. Welcome. And I want to also welcome our very distinguished guest this evening. Thank you, Kalia, also for that wonderful introduction. I want to introduce our very distinguished guest for this evening, our inaugural guest, who is Jason Moran. He is a pianist, composer, visual artist. And I should say, in the moments before the program started, you heard two tracks from his most recent album, which is called The Sound Will Tell You. And those two beautiful tracks, the first was Body and Soul with Intimate Friends, and the second, that lovely trilling track, was Follow the Light. There is so much to say about Jason that anything I could do would be a little incomplete unless I were to sit here for an hour. He's done so much. In brief, Jason is a 2010 MacArthur Fellow. He is currently the artistic director for jazz at the Kennedy Center. He's faculty at the New England Conservatory of Music. His band, the Bandwagon, has been performing together for 21 years. He has scored films, including Ava DuVernay's SELMA, among other film scores. And I should say, lastly, we're so honored to have him today because he is the inaugural artist in residence for the Mellon Arts Project. Please, let's welcome Jason.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I also felt that moment when Kalia said, "Good evening, everybody." And when we're all together, when we hear that, "Good evening."
I know, right?
So I heard that in my head as the echo that I know came back. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, Ayana.
I'm so glad. And I should say this is like banter, but Jason, I know Jason's wife for many, many years. And really oddly, this is the first time that Jason and I are going to have a big in-depth conversation. So it's kind of long overdue and strange in the Zoom environment. But anyway, I'm so glad to have you here. So I have way too many questions to ask. So I'm just going to jump right in. I think that in some ways, one of the things that I had hoped we could talk about tonight is a big and impossible question, but hopefully I'll break it down. And that big impossible question is, what is jazz? And so I was looking at a talk that you did a few years ago at the Contemporary Art Museum in Houston. And this talk you did was in conjunction with a Jenny Jones exhibit that was there. And you basically asked that same question. So I'm gonna quote you to yourself, if you don't mind. And you said, people wonder what jazz is. What are its ideas and properties? What is it really about? Is it classy? Is it sexy? Is it painful? Or is it just an idea that people like talking about? So I wanted to ask you to talk about what jazz is now and what it is for you as a musician who is born and come into his craft in an era that is sort of way past what we might think of as the gilded era of jazz, you know, with Monk and Coltrane and all the rest. So yeah,
Right.
what is it for you now?
Well, you know, it gets more and more complex as we as a community do, and we wrestle for answers in it, and sometimes it doesn't show up in the way that we like, and so that means we have to wrestle with it some more. So, I mean, the way I learn jazz is the thing that I hate that my parents play in the car when I'm growing up. It's like they turn it to the jazz station, but it's the jazz station that's keeping the neighborhood black in Houston, in Third Ward, Houston, where I'm from. And it's at Texas Southern University because they had a jazz station that they played the music all week long, keeping the airwaves black, showing how Blackness sounds across, you know, the reggae night, then it was the gospel night, and Friday was the blues cruise, you know, like Saturday was hip hop, you know, but all through the week it was jazz. And you know, there's two things that happen. You know, one is it's a music that not only is hard to understand because most of it is instrumental. So it does take the mind to have to figure out what the language is. And, you know, I often think, you know, now maybe metaphorically about how tribes of people are together who maybe not speak the same language, but then they find phrases that they can share with one another. Well, that's what music is. Music is why people call it the universal language, because it doesn't take any time for me to sit down at the piano with another musician and send them a sound that they then respond with another sound without having to worry about what the syntax is or what the code is in my language. They can feel it. And this music, powerfully enough, comes from people who figured that out over centuries. And by the time we start to explore what the music means to ourselves, music is then changing, you know, meaning like if jazz starts in the early 1900s and then by the time we get to 1950 and we start hitting R&B, then also the feel of the music is changing. So it continues to evolve. So up to today, and even back then, people just also were very contentious with the term jazz already as a term that doesn't necessarily qualify the depth, or as Toni Morrison says, the rainbow of what our sound is, what Black sound is. And so I wrestle with it now. Wrestle with if I'm on a plane, well, I'm not on a plane. When I'm on a plane traveling with the band and somebody says, oh, what do you do? Because, you know, people be nosy.
Right. They do. They do. Like, I'm just squished up in this seat. Leave me alone.
You know, and I really have to talk about music in a wider sense. And, you know, and it's why there's a movement of musicians, you know, really naming their own music. You know, Yusuf Lateef named his own music. Sun Ra named his own music. You know, Rahsaan Roller Kirk, you know, named his own music, because the categorization of the term jazz fails to kind of hold the beauty of what the music is and how complex it is, and the kind of brain power it takes for generations to figure out a language that people can share with one another, and also give them also platform to really shout who they are without fear of being lynched at the same time from the stage, you know?
Yeah, yeah. This makes me have 17 thoughts at once in my mind. But there's a question I was thinking about asking you, and I thought, oh, we might run out of time, but it seems really relevant given what you were just saying. I was thinking about about Albert Murray, who you no doubt know, but some people who are listening might not know. Albert Murray is a novelist, a jazz and blues scholar. He wrote 4 novels, many volumes of cultural criticism as well. And really well-respected figures, sometimes a little bit controversial, you know, in the things he would say and the ways he would say them. But in any case, he was really a towering figure. And he had a lot to say about the notion of improvisation. And he wrote a book called Stompin' the Blues, and another book called The Blues Hero. And I was thinking about that, and he, you know, he saw certainly jazz as kind of coming out of blues, and he talked a lot about improvisation as kind of a very specific African American idiom or mode of expression that was particularly African American.
Mm.
And of course, when we think about this music, we can't help but think about improvisation, and kind of what sort of role that might play.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wondered, I guess sort of bring it back, I wondered if you think of how you think about improvisation, both as part of the music that you make and part of this sort of uncategorizable thing that is jazz, right? And also what that means for us, for Black people as a people, you know, because I think there's something about improvisation that is also cultural to us. So I just wondered what you know, if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, you know, I think improvisation is threatening, because to a degree, there are parts of life that don't allow for any improvisation. And so then focus on a form of music that thrives primarily on it, not only threatens, you know, I say threatens, but in a band, the way you speak to one another really matters. What language you use, and if you say something, you know, with the wrong tone on the bandstand, if Betty Carter is singing in the front of the bandstand, she will turn around and cut you with a look. Or Cassandra Wilson will cut you with a look. Cassandra has cut me with a look before.
I was going to ask you, cut with the look.
And so that's the first part, is because to even to threaten to listen to the music, you have to then succumb to the story that's being told to you in a language, in a form that challenges maybe your own intellectual capability. Why I talk about people loving to talk about jazz, maybe not listening to it, because the ideas in it are so rich and you know, full of all the metaphors that we need in life. But to actually sit down and like, okay, I'm going to listen to, you know, the canon of Mary Lou Williams big band music today, you know, and listen to how she creates a language that and then becomes the architect for bebop. That changes things from her hand to people. So, you know, here, I always think about how we improvise in life. And I mean, like in real life. And I got on a plane in Austin, Texas, in a hotel. And there was a brother playing a basketball player, played for Cleveland Cavaliers, and his girlfriend. And we were I got on, was all right, so going down on the elevator. Older white man gets on, sees his brother, gets all googly eyed, and he's like, "Oh wow, you're a basketball player. You know, what team do you play for?" And the guy said Cleveland Cavaliers. And then I just turned, because I'm ready to, let's make some music then. I turned to the older white gentleman and I say, "And what do you do?" And the guy looked at me and I was staring right in his face. "What do you do?" And he got frightened and got off early at the next floor. And then I turned around when it was just us in the elevator. I said, "You never really have to respond to anybody." And in a band, you also don't have to respond to every phrase that is sent your way. I had to learn that as a young musician, when to play and when to not. And that's threatening for people who always say that you're going to jump when I speak. And when a musician, the phrase that we say to each other, especially older musicians to younger musicians, is they say, "Oh no, go ahead, tell your story." And they say it, and then they say also, "Then take your time." And Nina Simone always also talks about, "I'm gonna, you know, I'm coming out when I'm ready." I will make them wait. So there's something about time and response, when it's ready, when the moment is pregnant, and that's threatening to people because it does not show up on a clock, right? You have to follow it with your ear and your intellect and that can be scary as a listening practice, but for us, it's total freedom.
Thank you for talking about that. I was so struck by by your first answer, and it really came into my mind, and I thought of this. I found finally that Al Murray quote I was thinking of, in which he says, improvisation of experience in the blues idiom becomes survival technique and aesthetic equipment for living. And you just told this story about the elevator. Absolutely aesthetic equipment for living, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Also, sometimes we get lost in the form, I mean, which is what we call it. We call it getting lost in the form. You lost in the form, or you turn the beat around. I love the language that is within our practice is really beautiful. A bass player, they're walking. This stuff is about transportation. The drummer, is on the ride cymbal. Like it's always about movement, and but you have to be doing it in real time, and that's the part that musicians over time really try to figure out. It's been difficult now because I can't say that my improvisational capabilities have increased during the past year because I haven't been playing with anybody. So I've been talking about playing music so much as a kind of substitute.
Right. So I wanted to ask you another. I love this talk that I mentioned, and I listened to it several times because I thought it was really brilliant in many ways. And there was something else that you said in the same talk, back to this kind of wider idea of what is jazz and what are its properties. And one of the things that you said was technical excellence is elegance. And that is so elegantly stated. And of course, in my experience as a writer, it takes a lot of skill, a lot of working and reworking to get to the beautiful, elegant sentence, right? A lot of throwing away of all the other sentences. So you went on in this part when you were talking to use the word rigor. And I thought, and you've touched on this just now, I thought a lot about how Black artists, particularly musicians, and I would imagine even more particularly so, jazz, blues, and hip hop artists, their genius so often isn't attributed to rigor, right? It's or to expertise. It's kind of phrased in terms of, innate ability or instinct or all these other kinds of veiled animal terms, really, right? And so what you said in this, going back to that, you said, through the rigor you arrive at. And so I guess my question is, through the rigor, you arrive at what? And kind of what role does rigor have in your practice and your process?
Well, I think partially rigor is experience. Rigor is dirt under the fingernails. Rigor is, recovery from a awful performance. Rigor is when the music hits the apex. And you grasp for it the next night and you miss it totally. Rigor is the pursuit, but also knowing that it will take a kind of a moment of reflection to understand, because we're all, as artists, you can also really get into your own hype. You can get into your own sound and feel like, oh yeah, this is a thing, and without the ability to listen from the outside. That's like it's captivating, but it's also really frightening too, because after a certain point, when I think about artists, let's say Shaka Khan behind the drums, what it means for her to stand in front and then go all the way to the back and hit the drum kit and push the entire band, like that's rigor. That's not like I'm just gonna get back here and now just kind of play a beat. Nah, she's gonna propel the band from the drum seat. That's rigor. Nina Simone is total rigor at the piano and in the voice and in the mind. It's why we still flock to her music, is because she pulls all of those things together at once. And off of the bandstand, we'll pull a gun. We'll have the right thing to say to cut the air,
rigor in life, right? As on the stage.
Yes, because what's the use if you can't translate your stage to your life practice? I mean, sometimes it goes wrong. Look, we also know that, but this is what we're all supposed to be learning about our craft too. But I think of rigor as a kind of pursuit. I mean, over the past year, just even having a moment to pause from the stage, because there's a part of it that becomes, you know, kind of a habit, kind of a rotation. You travel to Europe, you play these concerts, you go to Japan, then you go back down to Texas, you see family, then you play a show outside in the hood, right? And then you go eat something after that, right? Like it becomes a kind of a habit. But you see people and you try to pick up new parts of the story every time you come around to those neighborhoods that I play in. But that collecting part, I feel over the past year has become the part that I'm trying to devote more rigor to. How to collect the stories, because what I'm watching happen in contemporary music right now is a deletion of how important this particular set of music is. So much so that there are people in the Grammys on a Black music collective committee who think that jazz is white. So these are real things. These are not fake things that that it can get that far. But this is also an old idea that musicians from the 40s were also talking about. And so my rigor still, you know, is in that pursuit. In the end, it's also about, you know, the arrival at the gate with the great, you know, after I see my family, when I get to wherever I'm going after this life. And then when I say, okay, I have to go see some other people, and I go around the corner and I see all the musicians who have taught me and the musicians who I'd never met in my life. I have a lot to have to show of what I did in this life. And that's also part of the rigor too. It ain't for the people on this earth right now. It's actually for the other spirits who are not here, but who left so much in the ground for us to tend to. And too much hard work gets unnoticed or not digitized yet. So I don't want to be that fool.
This leads me to another question that I was going to actually ask you later, but I think this is a good time to ask it right now. Is that I'm sort of peeling back yet another layer on the what is jazz question, and I wanted to talk, as you just have been, about the history and about the jazz past. And you've done so much work, as you're sort of talking about very purposefully. It's like you've almost already answered this question, but about making sure that past is carried forward as the time moves on, like a river, right? Not like the time is a straight line and we leave something behind, but we carry all this stuff forward with us. And so you've done these incredible solo projects with these concert series like the Fats Waller Dance Party and the Harlem Hellfighters, James Reese Europe, and the Monk in Town Hall, all of these kinds of things. And so I wanted to, I guess this is a good time to ask you how or why it is important for you as a contemporary jazz musician to dedicate so much of your effort to celebrating these folks now in this moment, you know, in 2015 and 2016 and 2021. Because, and you know, also when you're doing this stuff, you're playing those songs, but then you're also sometimes making new arrangements from them, etc. So it's like you're sort of touching the sacred stuff, you know? And so I wondered also if there was any kind of tension between like preservation and innovation.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, those the pieces around other artists, I really feel like I've been taught that way by musicians. I mean, my favorite musician of all time, and maybe the one who gives me a bit of purpose as a teenager, is Thelonious Monk. And Thelonious Monk had no problem having his own style, no problem having a compositional aesthetic, no problem have like total flavor, like kind of like his vines. Like he had no problem having any of that, but also he had no problem approaching anybody else's music and then putting his coat over it, right? Or changing the makeup on the face of the song. He would put a different eyeliner on it, you know, and all of a sudden the song had new character. And so he did this with anybody's music. Could have been Fats Waller, could be Duke Ellington, any of his heroes. He was like, yeah, well, so let me show you another side of that song you never considered. And he, for me, is maybe one of the best examples of this, of a way of not only showing that you have the capability to create a language, to learn a language and then create a language, but also how to take someone else's material and that our ability to still be here is because we know how to move something to the side, you know, to give it, oh, well, I'm from North Carolina, so it sounds like this, you know, or I'm from DC and it sounds like this. It sounds like my neighborhood. I'm from where Lightning Hopkins is from in Third Ward, so it sounds like this. And so that's also part of what I grew up with as a, it's just part of the puzzle that you try to figure out. And not all artists do that within the canon. Not everybody wants to devote that time to it. And some of my other favorite people only are about creating their own canon. You know, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, the AACM, you know, really pushing out the new canon because they also know that it's extremely important for right now to make stuff by any means necessary. So George Lewis, Henry Threadgill, Anthony Braxton, Mulhall Richard Abrams, Amina Claudine Myers. These are artists that really also said, nah, this is about right now. So I really try to balance those two. And I also think for, just as an educator, that it's really important to show a student that you're unafraid to touch what's sacred. And you're unafraid to put your hand in it. Like I think about Farrah Griffin, like taking, you know, diving into Billie Holiday's work. We're watching, you know, right now, all kinds of other things be done to Billie Holiday, you know, on film. But also it takes the time and the rigor to really do it the right way. So you have to be the example for that. And not that I'm trying to live a life as kind of like an example kind of musician, because I definitely make rude choices when I play. But I do think that for the value and for the future of the music, somebody has to be saying James Reese Europe's name out here. Somebody has to say Fats Waller's name. Michelle Ndegeocello has to say Fats Waller's name with me, you know, like it has to be a kind of communal effort. I think then it makes for a more vibrant creative community. And also then for the artists who are like 19, 17, who kind of see that happen, never forget that, oh, that was that name, that maybe when they're 35 or 40, they'll come around to their own project and be unafraid to then tackle those big subjects too.
I was thinking, as you were talking, I was also thinking about something else that I had toyed with, or I was going to ask you or not, which has to do with ownership of the music, and I mean that both materially and also kind of psychically and culturally. You know, you left Blue Note in, I think it's 2014. And since then you've released several albums, including this most recent one, The Sound Will Tell You, on Bandcamp. And when that's a very specific decision to do Bandcamp as opposed to, I don't know, iTunes, or, well, no more iTunes, but you know what I mean. So I wanted to ask you about independence and agency as an artist, and about ownership of the music you make, because I was thinking about how loaded that jazz past is that we've been talking about, right? And how very much, in a sense, through market forces, among other things, jazz has become, as you were alluding to, kind of like collectible, you know, like it's like an artifact or like a museum piece that's like super rarefied and really expensive, you know? And in that process, of course, in some ways, Black people as listeners, as makers and imbibers of our own cultural stuff, Black people who are going to go on to make music, as you were talking about, in some way that ends up kind of cutting us out psychically and materially over the ownership of our own, of this huge part of our own legacy. So I guess I'm wondering if you can talk about that aspect of ownership and a connection to the legacy, and also, of course, about ownership of your own music and how that's been for you.
Yeah, maybe I'll work backwards. I mean, you know, after 18 years of working with Blue Note Records, I couldn't ask for a better relationship also, you know, to make 9 records with them, kind of to be birthed, you know, by them from when I was 22 to up to when I was 40. So it's a long relationship, one that I cherish, but also one, you know, that's 18 years, you learn a lot too. And you learn a lot about what it costs and what you want for yourself for the future. And to a degree, I still owe Blue Note money just from 9 records and trying to recoup everything. I'd rather recoup to myself. So in the past 6 years, just paying for my own records, and my wife, Alicia Hall Moran, we having Yes Records together, just recording and making the music how we want, charging what we want for it. I mean, I'm not charging $20,000 for this music. It's $20. And trying to check the relationship. You know, there's one thing that I've watched happen is every year they love, I say those who make statistics about how small a percentage of the buying public purchases music that is jazz. So it's like less than 1%. That is a ploy to tell you that it's useless. That's the only ploy it is. It ain't there to tell you the market value. It ain't there to tell you what is accrued around the world and how much is spent. It's only to make you think that it's useless. That's the only way. Literally was on a Grammy call last week. Same thing come out of their mouth. That it's useless, that basically it's useless because nobody's buying it. Meanwhile, I know cultural capital doesn't work that way. I know that. You don't have to convince me about what a number looks like on a piece of paper. So for me, owning my own music is also something Max Roach did, Charles Mingus did. You know, Nina Simone is fighting for her music back. You know, you hear right now artists in the hip hop community, Megan Thee Stallion, yelling about where her music is, wondering why do artists get treated so badly by these labels. And that history, it goes to the very beginning. To the very beginning of the recording academy, or the recording industry, and that our bodies and our sounds are then kind of like, oh yeah, well they're always going to tell you that it's worth nothing, and then that's how they steal it from you.
Yeah,
right?
thinking about like race records, right? Like
all
that
of this,
all of that, yeah.
All of this, and so, you know, history is also there for you to learn something from it too. And I've told my children that this is the amount of money you should be looking for every year from royalties. This is what you should be looking for. And if it ever gets weird and strange, and I didn't tell you that it's getting strange, then you need to go out with an axe and find the money. That my music and your mama's music. You know what I mean? But it's real though, right? Like America doesn't want to pay for music. So they'll teach you and train all of you who buy your music and listen to music wherever you listen to it, that it's really only worth this. It's worth than a full tank of gas. Way less than a full tank of gas, let alone that you ever think about your favorite artist and want to buy just their record. iTunes will make it very difficult for you to just buy your favorite artist's record. They will say, no, purchase just a subscription and you can listen to it for free. I mean, like, you know, like, so they'll train us over and over. It's useless. It's useless. No, just get it. No, if you just get it from us, you can get all of it here, and you don't have to just give it to that one artist. Just you can get everything. Plus, you know, that music is useless, and they'll just keep saying it over and over again, where people will believe it. I don't believe it. So I spend my time not only looking for making sure I keep my own masters. I'm trying to get my masters back from Blue Note right now, and I'm also thinking about how to find the artifacts in the past that tell me that this is the right thing to do. That Earl Garner, that song Misty, that he fought for to get back, you know, funds his entire foundation. So one song, one good song. I don't have that, but some people do. Like for your books, it's the same thing. You know, like when I talked to Ava about SELMA, she's like, I don't even own SELMA. So what, you know, like I can't, you know, right? So how do we make sure to a degree that we stop showing up at the plantation gate with all of our best goods, you know, ready to say, no, well, you can put it in your ground, it's cool, you know? Not all of us have to do that. I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit weird, but yeah.
No, I don't think it is at all, right? And I think that there's a project, you know, running through the work that you're doing, from thinking about things like the Fats Waller dance, but you know, all these kinds of bringing this stuff forward to making the very specific decisions that you're making about what you want to happen to your music. There's a larger lesson here about and a larger project about making this stuff accessible, like bringing it back to Black people, like bring the music back home so people can get it, right?
Right.
And a simultaneous lesson about valuation, right? Like if everybody wants to say, okay, everything has a value, in this sort of capitalist context, well, then who gets to set the value, right? And that's, I mean, and that's a lot of what you're saying, and that I think is incredibly important, because most of the time in our history, we have never been able to set for ourselves the value of our labor, of our intelligence, of our creativity, of our souls, of our psychic beings, you know? So
yeah, think about your last negotiation.
Yeah, actually.
Just think about your last.
Wait a minute. All right, now I have to go make a phone call. I'm having a moment.
They'll look at you like you crazy because you value yourself. They will look at you like, how dare you have value or think you like. I don't know. I mean, it's a tough battle. You know, I mean, you bring up a beautiful point also about how do we make sure that we as a community continue to have access to it. You know, so living uptown in Harlem, but for me also really because I left Houston at 18 and, you know, really thinking about all my people down in Texas who were really just trying to pull themselves back together in a state that clearly does not want people to pull themselves together. But I go back to my neighborhood and I think about Third Ward and I think about, you know, them now starting an Emancipation Park, you know, festival, you know, in that park that anybody can come to, like the need for it on an annual or twice a year basis. There's just a simple need to kind of see and reaffirm things for the community over and over and over again. I mean, you know, and if that happens, then the diet changes, you know, and then people understand what is valuable because it's valuable for your time, just the time it takes to digest music or to digest a novel or to digest a dance. But yeah, then you'll know your value to the community, because if they don't want to hear it,
yeah, right.
they'll
Exactly.
tell you too.
Exactly. I'm gonna pivot a little bit because there's something that I really there's two things I want to make sure that we get to in the time that we have left. And one of them is, you know, we were talking a little bit earlier about improvisation and these kinds of things, and talking about the ways in which you think about rigor. And so I found this incredible clip that was of you sort of translating into music and playing along the piano with a Turkish woman who was talking into her cell phone. So I wanna play that now because I thought that it was really pretty incredible. And I think they're probably gonna cue that up for us. And then right after it, I'm gonna play what you sort of made out of that sort of very, it wasn't bare bones, but the sort of first stage was kind of playing along to this woman's voice, and then you sort of made a melody out of it. So I want to play both of those right now, back to back.
I was visiting Istanbul, and this friend of mine, a singer, Ahu Gural, she took me to all the tourist sites all around Istanbul. And at the end of the day, I took out my microphone and my recorder, and I asked her to talk to me in Turkish about what happened that day. So as she began to speak, her cell phone rang. So listen for the cell phone ring. As her cell phone rang, she then began to have a conversation with her mother. So I'm gonna play along with her as she has this conversation with her mother. This is ringing my phone.
Jason'la birlikte otelin odasındayız. Işıklar harika. Türkiye valla bayağı karışık. İstanbul'daki insanlar garipler ya, anlayamadım. Çocukları soymaya çalıştılar bana. Telefonum çalıyor. Ringing my phone. Efendim anne. Oturuyoruz anne. Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu, biliyor musun? Şimdi gördüm. Tamam peki. Ben cebini açık bırak, ben seni ararım. I will call you, okay? Tamam. Say to hello. Oturuyoruz anne. Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu, biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani duymadım ben hiçbir tane telefonunu biliyor musun? Yani
It's so great. I don't even have anything intelligent. And I've listened to it like in preparing to talk to you today. When I came across, I probably listened to that like 10 times. And every time I just start grinning because it's so delightful. So I guess I don't even know what my question is, but it's. I really just thought it was amazing. So I was like, well, I'm going to put that in the interview. But in part, I guess if I had a question, it probably has something to do with the kind of with this notion of making music out of this sort of the chaos and noise and sound, which of course includes the human voice and language of what's around you.
Yeah, the importance of it, the importance of what Pauline Oliveros calls deep listening, the importance of it to know that there's a sound in your mind, one, just in your body there's a sound, then there's a sound in the room that you're in right now, and then there's a sound outside of the room, right? So once you can become aware of listening to that already as a full orchestra, before you as a musician then make another sound, you have to think about how do you want it to align? Is it just about the ideas that are in my head, or is it in a relationship to the actual life? You know, the thing I was kind of talking about earlier about if you can't translate the things that you practice on the stage into the life, then maybe what's the point of doing it? I mean, when you were playing that, it made me also think about this really fantastic book by Tulani Davis called Nothing But the Music. And it says documentaries from nightclubs, dance halls, and a tailor's shop in Dakar. You know, like, because Tulani, you know, like, though we think about maybe a kind of writing about music that lives in jazz magazines, meanwhile, for me, this is really what we should also be reading, maybe even first, before, what it feels like to walk in. And these are, some are poetic, some are, you know, really about, you know, what she feels and hears in the air around the music. And that for me kind of like sets up then how to listen to the world, you know, thinking about, and especially like leaving Texas and moving to New York, realizing that the reason music in New York sounds so good, or luckily being here in the 90s, you know, when New York is, you know, still holding hip hop in the cradle, and then hearing, you know, the Roots come up from Philly, you know, with the Far Side coming from the West Coast, you know, like hearing Wu-Tang be birthed and Craig Mack and, you know, Lil Kim, right, just hearing it all happen on the street, to hear it ricochet off of the buildings as people were listening to it, you know, flavor in your ear. What, like to be in a city that is living the sound fully living the sound. And it still does today too, but a bit softer than it did then. I think about that. And so I also think about, how does it translate to my piano? Because I also have to think maybe not only what goes from here, the piano, out into the world, but how out in the world needs to go to the piano too. So that then when I show up and arrive at the Village Vanguard for a performance, there's something for me to play about. They don't talk about that in music conservatories so much, but it's trying to make the student aware that they have a very full life, that they should spend the rest of their life figuring out how to put it into their instrument. And if they do that, they will be a success. It's a difficult path to do, but it you know, I found that trying to document my travels on the piano, like with Ahu Garal, is the woman who was speaking in that Turkish clip, to figure that out would give a lot of value to making people aware of what even Turkish sounds like if you've not ever been to Istanbul, you know, to imagine a place far away that my music goes, that I, in my body, use my passport to travel all the way there to play, and then bring something back to my listening community. So I feel like also I owe it to the planet in a way, to continue to document it, not simply from a Harlem point of view, not simply from a Texan point of view, but as a global citizen, much like, you know, Paul Robeson decided to do.
Yeah, there's this sense of, I'm just thinking this sense of, I think about it in the same way as a writer, that I don't want to make language, I don't want to make books that exist in a sort of tiny little pod that are entirely separated from the world, from people's experience, from, because then it begins to seem incredibly useless and futile and narcissistic as an enterprise, right? Like, as opposed to sort of making something that is kind of riffing with the world and is in dialogue with the world in a very different way, of course, in literature than in music, but nonetheless, right? You're still having conversation in a certain way.
I mean, I always tell my student, unfortunately, you'll have to deal with the moment and your ego, because essentially what you're saying is, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to make you listen to me. Right. So essentially what Toni Morrison is saying, yeah, I wrote a book called Jazz, and this is how it starts. And I read this to my students, like when I talk about intros, I know that woman. She used to live with a flock of birds on Lenox Avenue, knew her husband too. He fell for an 18-year-old girl with one of those deep down spooky loves that made him so sad and so happy. He shot her just to keep the feeling going. Okay. That's how we starting this? Okay. You got me for about a week. So there's also a part of us that when we talk about rigor, it's also the ability to reach out and pull, to entice someone into that dialogue. I mean, you could stand on, this afternoon, my son broke his leg last week, falling down the stairs in the building. So the last thing we want to do as parents is take our wounded son to a hospital during COVID. But he was there to get checked today, and I stood outside the hospital watching people, which is the great New York pastime, really, something I haven't done, and watching the way people look at each other's eyes now, passing one another, staring deeper into people's eyes. Maybe I was being nosy, but staring deeper into people's eyes than I feel like that we as New Yorkers, we used to kind of buzz by each other. Yeah. But now people are like looking over the mask, and it was beautiful. So I feel like that is also the ability too, for people who live in a community, how they interact with it.
There's something that's sort of very important that I want to make sure we get to, because our hour is like flying by. So I'm going to sort of pivot entirely. I'm going to read a quote from the New York Times about you. And this is because I want to talk about all of this kind of cross-disciplinary work that you do, the show that you have up now. So I'm going to start by reading this quote. This is 2019, The Times. More than perhaps any musician of his stature, Moran, 2010 MacArthur Fellow, has consistently situated his work along the divide between music, visual art, literature, and historical inquiry. And certainly, I think we can see that, and the Times is referring to all these incredible collaborative projects that you've done with visual artists. I mean, Lorna Simpson, Carrie Mae Weems, Kara Walker, and on and on and on, just a few. But I think we're also seeing that they're also talking about the work that you have been doing yourself on your own as a visual artist. So I want to show a few images from a show that you have up right now that is running through February 27th. So let's show some of those images right now. This is a show. The show's called The Sound Will Tell You. I don't know, you'll tell me if that is named after, which came first, the name of the show or the name of the album. That's also the name of Jason's album out now. And so we're just gonna sort of look at, these are on a slide, and I just wanted us to kind of look at a few of these. This is obviously the sort of, kind of gallery wall. And then at the end, we'll see two specific paintings. And then I just kind of wanted to ask you if you could just talk about this work a little bit.
Sure. I mean, part of what music does is it kind of leaves a body print inside you, meaning we digest music from the inside. but physically, it it just is in the air. But every musician has a relationship to their instrument, and there are traces, what I'm calling the residue of the performance. So these are made with dry pigment dumped on a piece of paper, and that paper is then laid on top of the piano keyboard. And the pigment itself has its own relationship to the paper, decides to amplify the crease of the paper or to billow into a kind of a smoke. And when that happens, it leaves its own kind of trace. And so these are a collection of works that were made in the past year. Kind of the concerts I didn't get to perform to a degree.
All during this sort of pandemic isolation period. Okay.
Yes, yeah. And, and I think also, I often talk to musicians about, well, the sound can't be the only thing, there's the intention, right? There's the residue, there's the space that we play in as, a performance space, whether it's a club, the Schomburg or Studio Museum in Harlem or the Apollo, right? Or it's the people that you invite, the people who hear the music. Like that's the entire community around the sound. So I wanted to make things that also that I, to a degree, would have to wrestle with what they actually mean. And I'm still trying to figure it out as they are made, but they do offer another way for me a mode of making that is not simply press a note on the piano and then lift my hand and then it's done, but something that lasts.
Yeah. There was, I guess you sort of led me very conveniently, thank you, to my next question, which was essentially, and maybe you've already answered it, but it was essentially kind of what it means for you to say something, so to speak, in a language that's other than the language in which presumably you are most comfortable, even though of course it's rigorous and difficult, and that would be music. It's sort of what it means to say something in another way. And also, I guess, what it means to work collaboratively, going back to what I said a little bit earlier, right before we were looking at those wonderful slides, this work that you've done with people like Kara Walker and, et cetera, et cetera. It seems to me that there's this sort of incredible conversation going on there across disciplines that's about art making and process and rigor and Blackness. And so I wondered if you could just kind of leave us with a little bit of how those kinds of collaborative things, like what that means to you and how it works in with what you consider to be your project, I guess.
Yeah, well, this is going to go to 3 different moments in my life. One is every Sunday in Houston, going to my mother's mother, Benny Ruth Chester's house in 3rd Ward for Sunday lunch after church. And my mother had has these amazing sisters, and what it meant to be around my mother and her sisters and my grandmother as a ritual every Sunday. And then moving to New York and meeting Alicia, and then meeting Alicia's sisters, who are Asali Solomon, a great writer, Ayana Bird. And on one of my first dates with Alicia, going to Alicia's apartment, and then Alicia left the room for about 30 minutes and left me only with her friends from Barnard. And me sweating, trying to figure out, like, okay, I have to get past Asali and Ayana. And, like those women as thinkers who are very different from Manhattan School of Music. So when Alicia came to Manhattan School of Music, I ended up meeting all her friends who also really adopt a habit of thinking about how we look on paper, how we sound. So that then I think to a big degree preps me for the moment when I'll not only meet Adrian Piper and Joan Jonas, but then I meet Kara Walker and Carrie Weems and Lorna Simpson and Julie Meritu and Thelma Golden. I think about all these women, Farrah Jasmine Griffin, Kelly Jones, Elizabeth Alexander, the people who over time listen to the music with a kind of ear that the way they listen has gravity. The way they listen changes the way other people read. That is powerful to have in an audience to help give you a bit of something to look forward to in the constellation, to give you a bit more direction. And I challenge people to find their mentors and force them to spend time with your work and critique the hell out of it so that you could stand up the next day and say, okay, can I give you this now?
Right.
The need for it. In our community, we desperately need it from each other, up and down the line, you know, because I know we're stronger when that happens.
Mm-hmm. Unbelievably, we have come to the end of our time.
This is great, Ayana.
It was really great. Thank you so much for being here. It was such a good conversation. Jason Moran, everybody, his show, The Sound Will Tell You, is currently up at the Loring Augustine Gallery in Chelsea through February 27th. Latest album is The Sound Will Tell You, out now on Bandcamp. It has been such an honor. I'm Ayana Mathis. This is the Black Arts Dialogues. I hope that you will join us next time, which is April 14th, when we will have the great honor of having Dee Rees as our guest. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jason. And thank you to everyone who spent the evening with us.
All right. Good night.
Good night.